Storms coming, I can see the clouds. No running's gonna save you now. And a heartbeat is gonna fall down like gravity, like gravity. Eye for an eye says you owe me a debt. Blood that man's blood, gonna get your hands wet. The flood's coming, now you can't bet on tragedy, like gravity.
Jill Valentine was born in 1974 to French and Japanese descended parents. Not much is known about her early life until the 1990s when she would enlist in the US military, eventually taking part in Delta Force training. While not much else is known between then and 1996, when she would be approached personally by Albert Wesker, looking for recruits into the Raccoon City Police's Special Tactics and Rescue Service, or STARS. In her time as STARS, Jill would go on to befriend her fellow teammates, including Chris Redfield and Barry Burton. In July of 1998, a string of cannibalistic murders would begin in Raccoon City, and STARS' Bravo team would be sent in to investigate, but would lose contact, and Jill, along with the rest of Alpha Team, would be sent in. However, upon arriving and discovering Bravo Team's crashed helicopter, they would be attacked by a pack of what they would soon learn to be bioorganic weapons, forcing them into the mansion, and after spending the night investigating, Jill would discover that their team leader, Wesker, was actually an undercover agent of the pharmaceutical company Umbrella, and would confront him as he activated the BOW known as the Tyrant, and as a result, he would be impaled and killed. Jill and her former STARS member Chris would then do battle with the Tyrant, with Jill killing it with a rocket launcher, and after the fact, along with Chris, Barry Burton, and Rebecca Chambers, as well as their pirate Brad Vickers, would be the only surviving members of STARS, and they would escape the mansion just as it exploded. Afterwards, Jill would remain in Raccoon City, trying to convince the chief of police to allow STARS to investigate Umbrella, but their efforts would be blocked, and eventually the other STARS members would leave with the exception of Brad, who would work with Jill to investigate in private. However, that would come to an end in September of 1998 when Raccoon City would suffer a T-virus outbreak, during which Umbrella, having learned of Jill's investigation, would send a prototype Tyrant BOW known as the Nemesis, which would track them both down, eventually killing Brad. However, with the aid of UBCS Corporal Carlos Oliveira and Barry returning, she'd escape after a final battle where she destroyed the Nemesis. Afterwards, she would meet back up with Chris, and in 2003, they tracked down the last Umbrella facility and would destroy it, unknowingly being assisted by their old STARS leader. In the aftermath, Jill and Chris would become the founding members of the Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance, or the BSAA, and Chris and Jill would take part in several missions over the following years, eventually gaining a tip as to the location of Umbrella's old CEO, Oswald E. Spencer, where after tracking him down, they would discover that they were too late, and that Wesker had beat them there, having killed Spencer. Chris and Jill would attempt to finally bring Wesker down, but they proved to be no match, and as Wesker was about to finish Chris off, Jill would intervene, tackling him out of a window and falling down a cliffside. Being severely injured but surviving, Jill would be kept alive by Wesker and would be used as a test subject, eventually being the primary subject for a strain of the progenitor virus known as P30, which enhanced her physical abilities to superhuman levels, but also put her fully under Wesker's control. Afterwards, Jill would serve as Wesker's primary enforcer, assassinating targets, keeping his other allies in check, or whatever else he ordered of her. In March of 2009, the BSAA would start closing in on Wesker, with Chris himself investigating and eventually confronting Wesker, who in turn would reveal Jill's survival, and force the friends to fight, eventually leaving Jill to finish Chris and his partner Sheva on her own. But thanks to the massive dose of P30 in her system, as well as the damage sustained to the device, during the fight, Chris would be able to remove the device, freeing her from Wesker's control. Now free, Jill would work with fellow BSAA operative Josh Stone, getting their hands on a helicopter, and eventually discovering Chris and Sheva fighting Wesker in a volcano, where after the platform they were fighting on would begin to collapse, Chris and Sheva would be saved just before they would deal the finishing blow, finishing Wesker off once and for all, before the four would leave. After this, Jill would be placed under BSAA watch for an unknown amount of time, though what happened to Jill after this was unknown. Very little is known about the early life of Leon Scott Kennedy. All that's known for sure is that when he was young, his family would be killed due to their connections with organized crime, with Leon only surviving due to the actions of a lone police officer. This event would be what inspired Leon to eventually become a cop himself, eventually requesting to be placed at Raccoon City. Once he had arrived at Raccoon City, however, he'd realized that something had gone horribly wrong when he was attacked by zombies. During this attack, he would meet up with a young woman named Claire Redfield, who had similarly just entered the city looking for her brother Chris. The two would then be separated, but would agree to meet up at the police department. While there, Leon would find himself being stalked by the T-103 tyrant, which would track him down and attack him on multiple occasions throughout his journey. During this, he would meet up with a woman named Ada Wong, who claimed to be in the city looking for her boyfriend. Now traveling with Ada, the two would meet up with a reporter named Ben, who Ada believed had information that could help her. However, Ben would be killed by an unknown creature before they could get the information they needed. The pair would then continue into the sewers, where they would be attacked by Dr. Annette Birkin, with Leon taking a bullet meant for Ada and being knocked out. Later waking up, he'd meet up with Ada once again, but soon after, she'd be injured by a creature mutated by the G-Virus. Now fighting his way through an underground lab owned by the Umbrella Corporation, a pharmaceutical company, which was secretly developing bioweapons, he would eventually get a sample of the G-Virus, but soon after would be confronted by Annette, who'd reveal that Ada was a spy working for a rival company. However, before Annette could shoot him, they'd be attacked by the tyrant yet again. Annette would flee and Leon would be cornered by the bioweapon until Ada would attack it, protecting Leon and sending it falling into a furnace. However, Ada would be injured in the process and would seemingly die due to her injuries. With this facility set to self-destruct, Leon would meet back up with Claire and a young girl named Sherry. But before they could escape, Leon would fight the now mutated tyrant one last time. Ada, who had in fact survived, would supply him with a rocket launcher, allowing him to kill it. Now escaping, Leon and Claire would have one last threat to take care of with the mutant Dr. William Birkin, Sherry's father. Working together, the two would disconnect the car and would leave him to perish in the explosion. Soon after, Leon and Sherry would be taken into custody by the US military and would be separated. Leon would then be recruited and trained, being turned into a special agent of the US military and being sent on multiple missions. On one such mission, working with a man named Jack Krauser, who would show an interest in bioweapons after fighting them during their mission. Years later, in 2004, Leon would be sent to rescue the daughter of the US President, Ashley Graham, who had been kidnapped by the Los Illuminados cult. Making his way into the village that it was suspected she was being held in, Leon would eventually find Ashley being held in a church after fighting through villagers infected with the Las Plagas parasite. Now fighting his way back through the village and keeping her safe, the pair would come to a castle for refuge, finding it to be owned by a high-ranking cult member, Ramon Salazar. In this castle, Leon would once again meet Ada, who is now working for the former Umbrella agent Albert Wesker. Being separated from Ashley, Leon would kill Salazar and Ada would take him to the cult's island base, where Leon would once again rescue Ashley, but before they could escape, they would encounter the cult's leader, Osmond Sadler, who would control the parasite he had implanted into their bodies, taking Ashley yet again. After this, Leon would be attacked by Krauser, who had faked his death and would reveal that he was the one to kidnap Ashley to gain Sadler's trust. After a brief night fight, Krauser would gain the upper hand and would almost kill Leon before Ada would step in, betraying her comrade and saving Leon yet again. Fighting his way to Sadler, Leon would have one final fight with Krauser where he would seemingly kill him before rescuing Ashley and killing the Plagas parasites inside of them, before finally fighting Sadler himself, and would kill the man's mutated form after Ada once again stepped in to give him a rocket launcher. After this, Ada would betray Leon, taking the Plagas sample and leaving, but not before giving Leon the keys to a jet ski so he and Ashley could escape the island explosion. Now safe, Leon would then contact his higher ups and he and Ashley would be rescued, returning to the States safe and sound. Hello and welcome everyone to the first bonus matchup of Season 5 of my Versus series, where I will be going over some of my old research based on Leon from Resident Evil 4 and Jill Valentine from Resident Evil 5 to see which of these two protagonists would win in a fight. Oh right, I said Nero vs. Nello Angelo is coming next. Yeah, that's cancelled. I don't find Devil May Cry matches fun anymore. You're getting one more and then I'm done with the franchise. Anyways, moving on to this matchup, which I'm actually going to have fun with. The twist for this is that we're going to be using Jill not in her standard state as a BSAA operative, but instead we will be using her as she was under Wesker's control while operating with P30 in her system, enhancing her physical capabilities. Now I understand that at a glance this might not look like a fair fight. After all, Jill on her own is already fairly close to Leon in terms of what they're capable of. However, keep in mind that we are dealing with a character who has already shown to be capable of taking down a highly skilled and enhanced super soldier in the form of Krauser. So I don't think this is going to be as much of a trump card in Jill's favor as it may seem. But enough preamble. Let's get into this fight by comparing these two physically. During the events of Resident Evil 5, Jill is a 35-year-old woman standing at 5 feet 5 inches tall, or 166 centimeters tall, weighing 111 pounds, or 50.4 kg. Due to her nearly 2 decades of combat experience as a member of the US military, a member of STARS, a BSAA operative and Wesker's puppet, conditioning her body into peak human status, and her physical abilities were only enhanced when injected with the P-30, granting her superhuman speed and strength. She was able to effortlessly lift Irving off his feet and sent Sheva flying with a kick. Even as a normal human years before her control by Wesker, Jill was able to break a zombie's neck with just her legs, something she can do with even greater ease under the effects of P-30. She's crushed a zombie's head with her foot and moved 4 solid stone pillars, each being about as big as herself in the original Resident Evil. She was able to push Nemesis through a stone railing off of a clock tower, and most impressively, briefly overpowered Chris Redfield, who can punch a 30-ton boulder off of the ground and down a slope. And yes, while I do agree that Jill isn't quite as strong as Chris, even with the P-30, the fact that she was able to overpower him at all shows that she is in the same ballpark. In terms of speed, Jill is incredibly fast. She could jump through incoming lasers, perfectly dodging them during the fall of Umbrella. She could dodge strikes from multiple BOWs as early as the Mansion incident, including Hunters, Cerberuses, and a T-102 Tyrant. She reacted to gunfire, dodging bullets from Nikolai years before being injected with the P-30. And while on P-30, Jill is even more impressive, being capable of running up a wall with her speed alone, casually dodging shots from Sheva and Chris at the same time, and was even shown to move faster than they could react twice, despite both Sheva and Chris being capable of reacting to Wesker, attacking them head on, despite Wesker being even faster than Jill. Though this is more due to Wesker's predictable fighting style and Chris's knowledge of it than Jill being faster than Wesker. In terms of durability, Jill is yet another mixed bag, as she can be brought down by gunshots to a vital organ just like anyone else, but she can also survive much more damaging blows or ones on a similar level. Jill was able to keep fighting after being poisoned by the Yawn BOW in Resident Evil 1, as well as being able to keep going after being injected with the T-Virus by the Nemesis. She was struck over the head with metal restraints by the T-Virus infected Lisa Trevor, survived a slash to the face by the T-102 Tyrant, as well as several physical strikes from the Nemesis, including getting bashed in the face with his rocket launcher. She walked off being sent flying by Wesker, who could casually punch through a human torso, and finally survived getting shot with the Nemesis' missiles and even shrugged off close-range explosions. Even doing this again in Revelations and surviving a Stinger missile exploding right next to her in Resident Evil 5. During the events of Resident Evil 4, Leon would be a 27-year-old man, standing at 5 feet 10 inches tall, or 177 centimeters, and weighing 155 pounds or 70 kilograms. As a federal agent of the DSO, Leon would need to keep himself in peak physical condition, not only to fulfill his regular duties, but also to be ready as the use of bioorganic weapons became more and more common. Starting as always with strength, Leon, while not known for his physical strength compared to the other characters in the franchise, has still displayed impressive feats and scaling that put him far above the average combatant in his world. He could break free from the grips of zombies and granados, both of which are stronger than a normal human. As early as Resident Evil 2, he was strong enough to crush a zombie's head under his foot. Was shown to be able to do something similar in Resident Evil 4, could suplex monks so hard that their heads explode. With a single kick, he could send multiple granados flying back, including fully armored soldiers and abnormally large soldiers. And finally, we get into scaling, with Leon being capable of going toe-to-toe with Jack Krauser after he had enhanced himself with the Las Plagas parasite, making him stronger than what would normally be physically possible. This would place Krauser above even the likes of Chris Redfield, who is in the lore of Resident Evil a perfectly normal human being who in Resident Evil 5 was able to move a 15-ton boulder up off of the ground with just the force of his punches. And Leon was able to contend with Krauser, who, once again, thanks to the Plagas enhancing his body, should be stronger. And while even with this, I don't think Leon is quite on Chris's level, he should be capable of contending with this level of strength. Speed, on the other hand, is absolutely the area Leon is known for, consistently being one of the fastest and most acrobatic characters in Resident Evil, either being slightly above or below Jill Valentine's in terms of agility. Leon can casually evade strikes from Plagas mutants, such as the Chief, Salazar, and Sadler in his final mutated form. He threw his knife faster than Salazar, and his Vertigo bodyguard, who was enhanced with a Plagas parasite and a BOW capable of evading gunfire respectively, could react. He easily speed blitzed Ada in their first encounter in the castle, who in that game alone is shown to be able to react to the superhuman Sadler in his base form, and cleared entire rooms full of bullet dodging BOWs when she escaped Raccoon City while in a critically injured state. Going back to Leon himself, he was able to match Jack Krauser in single combat, keeping up with him in a prolonged knife fight despite Krauser effortlessly evading bullets and even the entire spread of a shotgun blast. Now, finishing off with a bit more scaling, Jack should be above everything I've listed so far. However, we once again need to scale him to Chris, who could react to Wesker, who has been placed at hypersonic levels of speed thanks to his ability to effortlessly evade high velocity bullets. And considering Chris can react to these levels of speed, it stands to reason that Krauser and Leon can as well. Leon is just as durable too, being capable of taking hits from powerful BOWs, such as Lickers, which are the final mutated forms of zombies infected by the T-virus, making them far more powerful than the regular zombie. He survives strikes from the T-103 Tyrant, which with a single arm threw Ada hard enough to destroy a metal control panel and can casually break through a solid wall, as well as strikes from a mutated Birkin in both his G1 and G2 forms, with the G2 being stronger than a base T-103, as well as the T-103 without his limiter, which in Darkside Chronicles was shown to be strong enough to all but throw a train car. He's also taken hits from a mutated Salazar and Sadler, who were much larger than the former BOWs, even surviving getting tossed around and ragdolled by both. He has tanked point-blank explosions from Krauser's traps, as well as not even flinching while in close explosions caused by a US military helicopter. And finally took hits from Jack Krauser, who similar to Leon can easily pop the heads of Granados with just his standard melee strikes, as well as enhanced strikes with his blade arm, which is so powerful it can reduce entire groups of Granados to nothing more than a red stain on the floor with a single blow. Both Jill and Leon are nothing short of exceptional combatants on a physical scale, easily being in the top 5 of the strongest protagonists in the series. However, the added element of this being an enhanced Jill does change things up quite a bit, making this a very different comparison than if I were to use Jill as she was during Lost in Nightmares or Revelations as a BSAA agent, or possibly even Death Island. But getting into the actual comparison of these specific versions, I feel the outcome is quite clear. On paper, strength is a bit tricky, seeing how Leon's standing up to and briefly contending with Krauser, who by virtue of being an enhanced human should be stronger than Chris, and Jill is just flat out capable of overpowering Chris, should have them both in the same ballpark, right? Well, yes, but actually no. Personally, I don't see Leon as being stronger than Chris fuck Boulders Redfield. To be clear, Krauser was significantly stronger than Leon in their bout, pulling off feats of strength like jumping up what must be 20 or so feet into the air that Leon simply couldn't replicate, or just blatantly being overpowered once the fight started to get serious, with one kick rendering Leon stunned long enough for Krauser to pounce, and without Ada's interference, Krauser would have killed him here, regardless of how much of a fight Leon was putting up. Meanwhile, re-examining Jill and her scenes with Chris, I actually think I undersold her with how well she managed to handle him in their fight. While I do think that it's true that Chris wasn't going all out, I also don't think that the gap in performance is entirely due to that, or due to the fact that she was able to put him into holds at multiple points in the fight. In fact, simply going off of how hard her hits are shown to land, I would say there is a significant strength advantage in her favor, as well as this point in the fight where she grabs one of his hands in a way that, if he were stronger, he would have been able to escape from. In fact, I would say Jill in this enhanced state is probably about on par with Krauser in terms of how their bodies have been enhanced, as well as to what level. But that's mostly speculation on my part, and even if you disagree, it doesn't really affect the category, as Jill is just flat out shown overpowering someone who should be stronger than Leon. So either way, strength goes to Jill. I don't think speed is an area that we need too much of an explanation in, given that at a glance, while Leon doesn't have any direct showing of him dodging bullets the same way Jill does, he does have scaling that would put him on par with this level of speed, due to his ability to temporarily keep up with Krauser and the Verdugo. However, there's just one problem. Jill has been shown to be capable of operating on levels of speeds Leon is at, both far earlier than he would be, as well as being at this level before receiving her enhancements. Keep in mind that we are outright shown that Jill is too fast on her own for someone who should be on a similar level, as shown when she fought Chris and Sheva, outpacing both of them at once. So considering that realistically, even if you want to say Leon is faster at that point than the both of them, it would not be a significant advantage. So there's really no reason Jill still shouldn't be the faster of the two. So even if you want to say Leon is faster than Chris or Sheva would be at that point, it wouldn't be a significant advantage. So considering Jill's performance against them, I really don't see a reason she shouldn't be faster. As far as I'm concerned, there's really no question about durability, which firmly seals this category in Jill's favor. While Leon is no slouch, taking hits from the T-103, Krauser, and Sadler, Jill just has far more impressive showings of survivability. Taking hits from the Nemesis as well as its weaponry, with that creature being an enhanced tyrant of the same model that Leon fought. Wesker, who is at a bare minimum stronger than both Krauser and Sadler combined, as well as surviving the massive drop after she tackled Wesker, as well as a high-powered explosive going off right next to her. Something Leon just simply isn't shown to be capable of. Even if you want to say he could survive these, the simple fact of the matter is that we don't see that directly. Meanwhile, we do for Jill, so by default, that gives her the edge, and has her sweep the entire category. The fact of the matter is, Jill was already on par with Leon before the P30. And while I would have given him a slight advantage due to him contending better on his own against Jack than she did while working in tandem with Chris against Wesker, the P30 in her system has more than closed that gap, flipping what at one point I would have seen as a slight advantage in Leon's favor into a pretty clear win for Jill here, winning her the edge in physical abilities. For the sake of giving Jill a fighting chance in this department, I will be granting her a combination of her weapons from the story mode, as well as her BSAA and Mercenaries loadout, as well as the handgun we see as a BSAA agent. My plan was originally to restrict her to just the weapons she used under Wesker's control, but trust me, when I get to Bucky, you're gonna see why I'm doing it this way. Her primary firearms were her pair of Scorpion machine pistols. These weapons had a magazine size that carried 30 rounds of 9mm bullets, firing at a rate of 850 to 900 rounds a minute, with an effective firing range of 490 feet or 150 meters. After being freed from Wesker's control and teaming up with Josh Stone, Jill gained a Heckler & Koch PSG-1 sniper rifle. And the sniper has an effective range of 3,280 feet or 1,000 meters, firing 7.62 by 51mm NATO rounds, with a muzzle velocity of 2,850 feet a second, or 868 meters a second. As a member of the BSAA, Jill's primary handgun was a Beretta PX4 Storm handgun. This weapon had a magazine size of 17 rounds, loaded by 9 by 19mm Parabellum ammunition, which has a muzzle velocity of 1,180 feet a second, or 360 meters a second, and can be used effectively at ranges up to 160 feet or 30 meters. She also carried a single explosive and stun grenade each from her Mercenaries loadout. And finally, Jill has been known to carry a survival knife with her into battle. Going off the appearance of this, it seems to be just over a foot long, with the blade itself being a single edge blade, with the blade itself being about roughly 9 inches. For this breakdown, I will be granting Leon the highest tier weapon of each available type from the Merchant during Resident Evil 4, excluding the RPG and Mine Thrower. These weapons being the Blacktail, the Striker, the semi-automatic rifle, the Killer 7, the TMP, as well as one of each grenade type. The Blacktail is based on the Springfield Armory XD. This semi-automatic handgun, when being used by Leon, fires 9mm ammunition with a magazine size of 35 bullets, when fully upgraded, with an effective firing range of 600 feet or 182 meters and a muzzle velocity of 460 meters per second or 1,507 feet a second. The Striker shotgun is very clearly a Cobra Street Sweeper variant of the Armsel Striker, which, when fully upgraded by the Merchant, can hold and fire up to 100 12-gauge shells before needing to reload. Finally, this weapon is effective at ranges of up to 20 meters or 65 feet. The semi-automatic rifle, from what I can tell, is a Heckler & Koch SL8. This semi-automatic rifle is capable of firing of up to 2,400 feet or 731 meters while holding 24 bullets in the magazine while fully reloaded, firing 5.56 by 45mm NATO rounds at a muzzle velocity of 920 meters a second or 3,018 feet a second. The Killer 7, outside of being a reference, is obviously an M1911 handgun. This gun has a magazine size of 14 bullets and considering the game treats this weapon like a magnum, likely fires 45 ACP rounds and has an effective firing range of about 160 feet, making it an excellent sidearm for close to mid-range combat. The TMP is based on a Steyr TMP, with an added shoulder stock for increased accuracy, with a fully upgraded magazine being capable of holding 250 9x19mm rounds, both being full auto and semi-auto at the flick of a switch, firing at a rate of 900 rounds a minute, with a muzzle velocity of 370 meters a second or 1212 feet a second, and with a maximum effective range of 100 meters or 328 feet. He will also be bringing 3 grenades into this encounter, 1 explosive grenade, 1 incendiary, and 1 flashbang. His combat knife, as far as I can tell, is roughly 8 inches from the butt of the handle to the tip of the blade, being a double-edged blade that becomes serrated on both sides near the grip, making this weapon great for both stabbing and slashing. During this mission, Leon also obtained combat armor from the merchant, granting him protective gear from both firearms and melee strikes on his torso and elbows. Both Leon and Jill are bringing a respectable arsenal into this encounter, and while they do share several pieces of equipment, this is far from an even category. To start off with, the elements of their gear that will go uncontested, Leon is already taking a sizable lead right off the bat, with his striker shotgun being completely uncontested, with Jill not bringing any sort of shotgun to match it. And man, let's be honest, even if she did, the merchant's borderline supernatural ability to fit 100 slugs in that drum will win anyway, on top of Leon's protective gear giving him better protection than the bodysuit Wesker put Jill in. Jill also isn't bringing an incendiary grenade, which, while admittedly not a huge advantage, is just one more area where Leon is uncontested. Even if it is a minuscule element, it does add up. Starting with the actual comparison with their handguns, both of their firearms are using 9mm ammunition, meaning that they're going to be having the same stopping power, so there's no real advantage there. However, after that, Leon's Blacktail sweeps everything else, having roughly 400 more feet of effective range, the rounds coming out of the chamber at about 300 feet faster, and having more than double the amount of rounds in his magazine compared to hers, meaning that he's objectively bringing a far better handgun into this engagement. Turning to their respective submachine guns, I'm actually going to give Jill a break and limit Leon's magazine size to be even with both of her Scorpions, because 250 rounds in the magazine is just kind of retarded. Yeah, I know I gave the Striker its full ammo capacity, but A, that's a weapon that's already uncontested, and B, if I were to evaluate Leon now, I would most likely limit his weapons to real-life magazine sizes. So we're going to cut Jill a break and just say ammo capacity is technically even. Now, in case you were wondering, the reason I'm being so generous is because it doesn't make a difference. Starting with the effective firing range, Jill's Scorpion submachine gun machine pistols technically have the advantage of 50 more meters. However, I am actually going to dock her accuracy here because of how she uses her weapons, using them in an akimbo-style dual-wielding manner rather than properly aiming and using them one at a time. Yes, these are technically handguns, but they're also machine pistols, and the recoil is meant to be compensated for with both hands, not a singular one. Other than that, they both have the same round RPM rate if we're taking the Scorpions at their higher possible RPM rates. So the last thing to examine is the muzzle velocity, where Leon's TMP takes the edge with the bullets from his TMP coming out at about 150 feet faster than her machine pistols. But to be clear, that insane amount of ammo per magazine would have won him this weapon section regardless. So ultimately it didn't change much, meaning it was all for nothing. Yay! Getting into their long range by comparing the sniper rifles, this is the first weapon that goes to Jill, who is using a larger ammunition type as well as having a superior range with about 400 more feet. Now, to be fair, Leon's sniper does have a larger ammo capacity and a faster muzzle velocity, but considering the type of weapon I'm comparing here, I think we can agree that range and firepower are the more important areas to look at. Wait a minute, did I copy and paste this from Leon vs. Snake? Now, going so far into the opposite direction that is going to give some of you whiplash, when we examine the polar opposites with their knives, design-wise, while somewhat similar, I would say that Leon's lent itself more towards stabbing, while Jill's would be more proficient with slashing. But as usual, both would be capable of doing both. And seeing as neither of them are bringing stab-proof material, because as a friendly reminder, bulletproof vests are not knife-proof, they would be generally similarly effective. Meaning that in this instance, I will be giving Jill's blade the edge, seeing as it's both longer and wider, giving her more range, even if just a tiny extra bit, and ensuring that any blows that are landed with this weapon are going to be more serious. Okay, so objectively speaking, Leon is bringing the more impressive arsenal here. While true that none of Jill's weapons are completely outclassed here, the simple fact of the matter is that Leon is taking the lead in all but 2 areas. And similarly to Jill, he's close enough with those 2 weapon categories that it's a difference that can be compensated for. So, with having no major advantages with her weapons, as well as being uncontested in areas such as body armor and having no shotgun, I will be giving Leon the edge in weapons and equipment. By the events of Resident Evil 5, Jill has been an active combatant for over a decade, enlisting into the military as a young adult, eventually receiving Delta Force training before serving as a part of STARS, and after the Raccoon City incident, taking on Umbrella directly, and later serving as an active BSAA agent, all of this molding Jill into an accomplished and skilled combatant, with Wesker's P-30 control on her removing any mercy, hesitation, or fear, making her into an even more efficient killing machine. As a former soldier in the US military, Jill would have been taught in Taekwondo, a fighting style mainly involving kicks used for high power as well as precision. However, Jill has also taken this a step further, implementing highly acrobatic maneuvers to increase the momentum of her strikes. Muay Thai is a fighting style similar to kickboxing, but teaching the use of elbow and knee blows rather than just the hands and feet, effectively allowing the user to implement their full body as a weapon, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which teaches grapples and holds to force an opponent to submit. Unlike someone like Wesker or Alexia Ashford, who simply use their physical enhancements to overwhelm physically weaker opponents and relying less on their skill, Jill did the exact opposite, using her enhanced physical abilities to become a more efficient fighter and to serve the advantages her combat style would provide her, while lessening its drawbacks. The P-30 allowing her to operate at a level she simply wasn't capable of before or after. Tactically, Jill, while under Wesker's control, aimed to quickly end a fight as efficiently as possible, often attacking in a rushdown style of combat to overwhelm her opponent. However, this is not to say that she is simple-minded in her tactics, as she is still capable of strategizing on her own and selecting whichever approach she thinks will be best, should she come up against an opponent she cannot simply overwhelm. This is best shown, ironically, years before being put under Wesker's control up against the Nemesis BOW, where, due to her being unable to bring it down with her, she used corrosive substance in a waste material facility to literally melt the Nemesis, forcing it into a state where it had to consume biomass from a super tyrant in order to live. And even after evolving, Jill managed to defeat it by tricking it into walking into the range of a railgun, as well as the time when she served as Wesker's partner in the 2-on-2 fight between them and Chris and Sheva, or when she extracted Irving using a smoke bomb to conceal herself. During the events of Resident Evil 4, Leon had already undergone training by several different organizations, including the police, special forces, and as a federal agent, giving him plenty of time to hone and specialize in his skill set to take on any threats he would come across during his missions. The first and most common fighting style I see from Leon is Taekwondo, a fighting style mainly involving kicks used for high power as well as precision strikes. Taekwondo was Leon's primary combat style that he used for the majority of his adult life, even being proficient in its techniques as early as the Raccoon City incident, as shown in his retelling of events in Darkside Chronicles, meaning he likely would have already started training in this style in his mid to late teens, and his government training only improved his use of the style, becoming proficient enough to combat highly skilled super soldiers like Jack Krauser, who had already bested Leon in their initial encounter. Leon also took the time to learn Systema, a hybrid martial art covering strikes, grapples, and basic counters, implementing techniques from Muay Thai, allowing him to use his entire body as a weapon, and even karate, making Leon more of a generalist when it comes to combat, being capable in most scenarios, however never truly mastering any of them. Muay Thai is a fighting style similar to kickboxing, but teaching the use of elbow and knee blows rather than just the hands and feet, effectively allowing Leon to use his entire body as a weapon mid-combat. Karate is predominantly a striking art using punching, kicking, knee strikes, elbow strikes, and open hand techniques such as knife hands, spear hands, and palm heel strikes. Though historically and in some modern styles, grappling, throws, joint locks, restraints, and vital point strikes were also taught. However, Systema does teach specialization in one area of combat, which Leon has been shown to be highly proficient in with knife combat. Systema not only teaches disarmament, but how to quickly and efficiently kill an opponent with the use of a knife for close range combat, with Leon being shown to be incredibly skilled in this area, stalemating Krauser for a solid minute, which I know doesn't sound groundbreaking in any way, but taking into account that real knife fights are typically decided in 1 or 2 blows, and Krauser's status as an ex-member of Special Forces and a superhuman, this is a very impressive showing of skill for Leon. While not known for his tactical abilities, Leon has consistently shown the ability to adapt to and predict the combat style of his opponents, even when going up against creatures he has never faced before, such as the many mutations of Birkin, the Super Tyrant, Chief Mendez, Salazar and his right hand, and even Sadler's mutation. At a glance, it's easy to see that Leon and Jill are 2 very similar combatants. Not just in terms of their respective combative styles, but when it comes to the mindset in which they approach combat, to the point that even before her P30 enhancement, I would say that Jill and Leon are probably the closest fighters in terms of combat skill in the franchise. Starting off with their tactics, I would say that they even each other out here. They both happen to be very effective generalists, meaning that both Leon and Jill are very adaptable and are shown to be capable of changing how they operate in a combative situation on the fly, both being shown to take advantage of their environment and lapses in concentration of their enemies, and doing so to great effect, as well as both of them being expert marksmen capable of hitting incredible shots and even shooting bioweapons and enhanced humans who are capable of evading gunfire. So in terms of how they're going to approach and operate within combat, I think this is going to be a very even bout. Now, to handle one misconception that I just honestly don't want to deal with in the comments, Jill in her controlled state is not a feral or mindless combatant. That only happened due to the overwhelming amount of P30 Wesker had injected into her system in order to psychologically torture Chris by making him fight his partner and best friend in a feral state. This doesn't really reflect on her standard P30 controlled state, as she is shown to be capable of thinking clearly and planning ahead. Now moving on, it's when getting into close quarters combat is when we start seeing how this fight is going to shape up. When it comes to comparing the respective uses of their main combat style, as much as I will go up to bat for Leon and say that by this point in his life, he has already become a master Taekwondo, I just genuinely don't see any sort of arguments to place him over Jill in this scenario. Now, that's not to downplay him in the slightest. I still stand by everything I said in his analysis, but the simple fact of the matter is that P30 is giving Jill an unmatched advantage here that he simply can't replicate, using her enhanced physical capabilities to push her fighting style to its absolute limit, utilizing it in every aspect of her combative approach, and elevating it to levels that Leon simply can't match. Now, I know what you're thinking, but shouldn't Leon already be able to contend with this? After all, what about his fight with Krauser? And to that I have to say, what about his fight with Krauser? Like, don't get me wrong, I understand that most of us decide to square up with our knives every time we play this boss fight. Hell, that's how I played this boss fight. But basically, all context clues and story beats point to that not being how this fight played out in canon. Remember, canonically speaking, Leon is below Krauser when it comes to close quarters combat. We are shown this pretty definitively in their first encounter, where Leon is playing defense for most of the fight. Even using the remake timeline, where I personally believe Krauser in his base state was only as powerful as he would have been during the events of Operation Javier, we see that he's ultimately able to overwhelm Leon in physical engagement, to the point where a third party needed to step in and save him. So while I don't think it's debatable that Leon is bringing enough skill to be a legitimate threat to Jill, in a straight up fight, she's still objectively performing better using the same fighting style he prefers to use. Similarly, both of them are practitioners in Muay Thai. However, unlike Taekwondo, where I would say that Jill was probably Leon's equal, if not slightly below or above him, depending on where you personally feel in terms of that fighting style prior to her enhancements, this isn't the case, as she was just straight up better than him even before being enhanced. Not only being shown to use these techniques more commonly than Leon, but doing so more effectively, using it as a mainstay and primary element of her combative approach, while Leon merely absorbed its teachings into his use of Systema. With her enhancements, similarly to how she uses Taekwondo, would elevate her use to the next level, allowing her to focus attacks and land devastating blows quickly. And speaking of Systema, in case some of you thought I was starting to intentionally bully Leon, I will say that when it comes to the use of their knives, there is no doubt in my mind that Leon holds a significant advantage. Jill's knife skills, while effective, are nowhere near as much of a core to her combat style as it is for Leon. Now, it's true that her Delta Force training would have made her, at the very least, highly proficient in knife-based combat, as well as her time as a member of STARS, most likely requiring disarming opponents carrying bladed weapons. The simple fact of the matter is that for her, this is more of a last resort or opportunistic use of the weapon, while in comparison, Leon's use of the knife was far more generalized, as well as being more willing to use it as an option before it would become a last resort or holdout weapon. And simply put, even if we want to assume she is on the same general level of skill, we're just never shown anything that really supports this idea by this time in the series. So given what we are actually shown about the characters, I have to assume that Leon would be superior in terms of pure knife-based combat. Now, one element I want to acknowledge here, even though I kind of glossed over it within her breakdown, is Jill's more feral state, seeing as it drastically changes her fighting style, trading her more precise and controlled attacks for heightened aggression and flexibility. Now, to start off with, I don't think this is going to have a major effect on the match, seeing as in order for her to reach this state, one of two conditions must be met. Either Wesker would need to manually cause the device injecting P30 into her to overclock and fill her system with a higher dose than she's used to, or for the device itself to become critically injured to the point where it malfunctions and starts injecting her with more by mistake, both of which are highly unlikely situations. To cover the first one, while Wesker does very likely keep tabs on Jill while she's out on missions, for the most part, we're shown that she operates mostly independently, most likely with their communications being limited to radio in once in a while, or to check in once her task is complete, so that she can receive orders from her next assignment. Also, for the record, Wesker interfering would be considered outside help, which is something I don't include in these videos, so it's not happening either way. Now, secondly, the P30 device is typically something she keeps hidden. So while I do think that given the rules of the universe that Leon would target it if it was out in the open, considering that it will be concealed for the majority, if not the entire fight, I don't see him targeting it without landing, and even then, considering it's durable enough to withstand Magnum rounds, I don't think one strike will be enough to disable it or cause the malfunction. Now, if for whatever reason she is pushed into this state, I would say that Leon would have the overall advantage, as she would be thinking about her approach far less and just focusing up on her aggression, making her attack mentality no different from a typical BOW Leon normally faces. But with that being as unlikely as I believe it is, I don't think that would play much of a factor in this fight, if at all. Finally, what seals this category for me is something I've actually already gone over in the past. In fact, the same element that lost Leon the category in the last fight I used him in is the same thing that's going to cost him the category this time. And that's that, as far as we can tell, Leon has an abysmal defense when it comes to opponents who are willing to grapple and throw him around, as we are shown in both the QuickTime events where we're introduced to Krauser, as well as his general boss fight, that Leon is more than susceptible to being put into holds. And while I don't think she's specialized in this, I do think it's a reasonable assumption to say that she is proficient enough with them to get the upper hand on Leon. In fact, that previous statement wasn't even speculation. It's hard canon, as we are shown in Resident Evil Death Island, that even without the P30 in her system, that Jill is skilled enough to control the fight and keep him from landing any blows. So considering the fact that the version of Jill we're talking about is both more aggressive and is made to fight more efficiently than she was in that movie, I have a hard time buying that Leon is gonna get the upper hand in this fight. Now, to be fair, if this was like pure knife skills, he would have enough of an edge to take her down. But when considering their fighting styles as a whole instead of looking in that one specific spot, knife combat is the only area he has a chance in, and Jill could realistically just disarm him of his blade. Overall, while Leon is no slouch, looking at what they're both capable of on an objective level, it paints a very clear picture of how this fight will go. In fact, just like physical abilities, I would even go as far as to say that Jill would already be matching Leon, if not slightly surpassing him without the P30. But using a version of her infected with the virus, she simply outclasses him. And it is for these reasons that I give Jill the edge in combat skills and tactics. Let's set up this fight. Let's say that it takes place during the events of Resident Evil 4, and that rather than fighting Krauser in the ruins, Wesker has instead sent Jill after him, feeling as though Krauser would be better utilized in taking down Sadler, and understandably not trusting Ada to get the job done, sends in his own personal puppet. Now, as for an explanation as to why Jill is already under his control at this point in the timeline, shut up. As Leon made his way through the pillars that made up the entrance to the ruins, he couldn't help but feel as though something was missing from the area. After all, it was an enclosed environment with plenty of twists and turns, and typically in his experience that meant there would be a particularly stubborn bioweapon trying to take him down. Really, the lack of an opponent was starting to feel anticlimactic, like a major fight had been built up, but no actual payoff had been given to him. And while he wasn't one to complain when his job was made easier, it did feel unmistakably weird. A moment later, he realized he had simply been too hasty in his assumptions when he heard the sound of heels hitting the ground behind him. At first, he thought it had been Ada, once again coming in with her convenient timing in order to give him some cryptic advice or help him out of his bind somehow. But then he noticed that whoever was approaching him didn't have that same calm, almost nonchalant gait Ada had. Now, this was a far more aggressive advancement, heading right towards him. Turning around, he didn't know what to expect, but a figure in a sort of plague doctor's outfit wasn't high on his list. Then again, after everything he had seen up until that point, he couldn't say he was particularly shocked either. Drawing his gun, he immediately took aim, the woman stopping in her tracks and staring him down, unflinching at the gun pointed directly at her head. Playing the strong silent type, huh? Isn't that usually a man's gimmick? Leon asked, his tone dry as usual, trying to get a reaction from the woman and gauge just what kind of opponent she would be. However, Jill, only caring about her objective, didn't care for the banter, instead using his nonchalant attitude to move in an instant grabbing a hold of his wrist, forcing the agent to drop his gun and taking it for himself. However, while he had let go of his gun, he was far from disarmed, immediately drawing his knife and thrusting it forward, Jill dodging and attempting to land her own strike in retaliation, not having the space to probably get in aim on it. But he immediately proved to be faster than she had anticipated, and in an instant his knife was at her throat. Okay, I guess we're skipping the banter and getting right to it. I'll give you one chance. Surrender, and I'll take you in instead of putting you down. He told me you would have a bleeding heart. Jill responded coldly, her monotone voice giving less emotion than the knife at her throat, as she refuses his offer. I'm going to enjoy putting my blade through it. In a flash, he drew her own knife, both of them quickly beginning to engage in bladed combat. Every move was a careful, precise strike, the two immediately recognizing each other as the sort of fighter you didn't take lightly. However, Jill, being programmed only to carry out her mission rather than prioritize her own safety, so long as her objective was carried out, was the first to press a more aggressive approach, her blade already a blur in Leon's eyes as she moved to strike him down. However, the agent was more than ready to keep up, matching her ferocity blow for blow as they entered a back and forth, neither being able to press an advantage for too long before the other would spot an opening and turn the tables, putting the other on the back foot just as quickly. Wanting to break out of the stalemate, Jill would become even more aggressive, lunging forward in an attempt to open Leon's throat, only to overexert herself, giving Leon the perfect opportunity to parry her strike, the sudden change in angle leaving her open. Seizing the opportunity, Leon moved in, preparing a roundhouse kick aimed squarely for Jill's temple, intending to knock her out, if not kill her. However, having already recovered while he was in mid-swing, Jill acted quick, leaning backwards just in time to evade the kick, though her mask was caught, being thrown off of her face as she flipped backwards into a handspring. Using her cloak to mask her movement, she reached down and pulled one of the Scorpion machine pistols from its holsters, opening fire on Leon with several bullets hitting him square in the chest, the sudden impact knocking the air from his lungs as he stumbled backwards, clutching his chest as he fell to his knees, suddenly in pain, as the multiple 9mm rounds, while failing to pierce his bulletproof vest, still hurt like a bitch. Wanting to get this battle taken care of, Jill didn't waste any time, immediately marching forward and placing the barrel of his own gun against his head. But just before she could pull the trigger, Leon once again sprung into action. With a swipe of his blade that was too fast for her to even see, he slashed open her thigh, causing her to flinch just enough for him to knock the gun away right before she pulled the trigger. Taking advantage of her momentary lapse in concentration, he delivered a powerful front kick that knocked the woman off of the area they had been fighting in. Moving over, he looked off the edge just just long enough to confirm whether she was dead or alive, and let out an annoyed groan, as well as a roll of his eyes as he saw the woman writhing on her back, still alive despite the dangerous drop. But having an objective that was far more important than fighting this unknown agent, he turned, making his way towards the next objective and hoping to avoid her as long as possible. As Jill recovered on the ground, she eventually pushed herself to her feet. Growing frustrated with the tangle her cloak had become, she tore it off of her frame and threw it to the ground, pulling her sniper rifle from the tangle of cloth as she watched the man run. Taking note of where he was moving and seeking to cut him off, she similarly started to move, or rather sprint, moving so fast that when she approached the area she was seeking to set up position in, rather than take the entrance, she simply started to move vertically, running up the stone wall before leaping up onto one of the buildings and taking a sniping position. As Leon turned the corner, he immediately saw the reflection of her scope and dove into cover, just narrowly evading the shot she had aimed for his head, several strands of his carefully maintained hair falling to the ground beside him as he withdrew his TMP from his back. Already knowing her position, he decided to go for being able to spray more bullets over accuracy, peeking out just enough to open fire, forcing Jill back into cover as he ran forward, advancing until the clip started to run dry, and ducking back down once again. Back with Jill, she let out a frustrated growl, glancing back over just enough to get a bead on his position, and knowing he would likely attempt the same approach, took aim before he had a chance to step out, her finger carefully waiting on the trigger, and predictably, he jumped out and started blind firing his submachine gun once again. But this time, Jill didn't duck down. Instead, she aimed for center mass and pulled the trigger, the rifle bullet tearing right through the Kevlar vest unlike her submachine gun rounds before. The bullet passed through his lower abdomen rather than his chest, saving most of his organs from the shot. However, the trauma once again causing him to drop, applying pressure to the wound as he struggled to get back onto his feet. However, by then, Jill had already lined up another shot, her scope aimed right between his baby blue eyes. Seeing this and moving quickly, Leon reached towards his belt, grabbing a flashbang with his bloodied hand and pulling the pin before throwing it towards the sniper. The predatory eyes of the assailant following the motion on instinct, only realizing a moment too late that it was the nature of what he had thrown, getting an instant burst of light directly into her retina through the scope, the shock causing her to drop the sniper rifle as she covered her eyes, stumbling backwards in pain. With her vision slowly but surely returning, Jill looked down only to find the blood trail already leading towards the entrance of the building. Making her way over to the ledge, she glanced over, finding that he had already entered and was likely already behind her. On a whim, she spun on her heel, delivering a powerful kick at roughly head height, and just as she had predicted, he was right behind her. Reacting quickly, Leon backflipped away from the woman, narrowly avoiding her attack. As he landed, he took aim once again, but rather than giving him time to open fire, Jill moved in, grabbing a hold of his TMP with one hand and his wrist with the other, wrenching his aim to the side and putting his arm into a lock. For a moment, Leon tried to struggle free, but found himself unable to even pull away with the combination of the angle his arm was being held at and her sheer strength. Having him secured, she pivoted onto her foot, flipping him over her shoulder and onto the ground, once again disarming him of his weapon. Taking advantage of his momentarily stunned state, she once again drew her survival knife from its sheath and plunged it downwards, attempting to stab him through the heart as he was unable to move. Rolling out of the way at the last moment but receiving a large gash on his bicep, Leon, knowing the fight was far too close for him to go for his striker or attempt to wrest the blacktail back from her, once again drew his knife and prepared to engage in close combat. This time, however, having a taste for his fighting style, Jill was even more prepared. Yet, paradoxically, none of the swings for her knife were aimed to kill, instead just keeping him too busy to retaliate. Leon, of course, realizes this, but at the same time knows he can't lower his defense to do anything about it without opening himself up for an actually lethal blow. So instead, he buys time, waiting for an opening and eventually finds one. As she pulls her blade back in order to thrust it towards his chest, Leon spots a gap in her guard. However, the crucial detail missed amidst their back and forth was that Jill hadn't had her guard up at all, and recognizing the incoming blow as one she could survive, she lets it land, the razor-sharp blade piercing her shoulder for a brief moment before he pulls it back to continue his attack, expecting her to flinch away. But instead, Jill pushes through the pain and rushes him the moment he pulled his knife back. The first kick lands against his jaw, shaking him just long enough for her to jump into the air and deliver a second, more powerful kick that cracks his sternum the moment it connects, sending the younger man flying through the air until his back hits the crumbling stone wall, resulting in pieces of stone and dust falling over his back as he struggles to get up. However, seeing an advantage in the distance, he reaches back and pulls out his striker shotgun, ignoring how his muscles ache just from grabbing the weapon long enough to line up a shot. Jill, who had anticipated this, dashed to the side. However, the spread of the shotgun blast resulted in more than a few pellets hitting her arm inside, but she ignored the warmth of her blood starting to seep down her skin and rushed forward, pressing her newfound advantage and forcing Leon onto the back foot once again. Now she wasn't even bothering with her knife, simply using her enhanced physical state to overpower him. If he would throw a kick, she would match it with her own. If he would swing at her with his blade, she would evade it and throw him to the ground. By now, Leon was getting desperate enough to similarly forego defense, now just trying to keep up with her so that she wouldn't be able to push him around. He narrowly dodged a flying kick, landing a slash across her side as he evaded. But as he was starting to slow down, every missed strike was getting closer, and he knew that if he had any hopes of still winning this thing, he had to end it now. So, moving for one last gambit, he took a page out of her book and started swinging his knife rapid, every blow aimed to kill, forcing her to go on the defensive, ending his combo with a low kick meant to sweep her feet out from under her. Yet once again she used her superior speed to her advantage, dodging the blow. But not wanting to give up, he grabbed the spare knife Ada had shot out of Krauser's hand and threw it directly at his opponent's chest. And while she did manage to narrowly dodge the weapon, the split-second opening allowed him to move in and swing his blade right at her throat. But by now, the damage he had taken throughout the fight had started to get to him, and he was too slow to close the distance fast enough, allowing Jill to leap over his head. And taking advantage of the seemingly perfect opportunity, she brought her foot down against the back of his knee. Before Leon knew what was happening, his knee had been shattered, leaving him unable to stand, let alone dodge out of the way in time, as Jill grabbed him by those long, luscious locks and pulled his head back, giving her more than enough room to plunge her own blade into his chest. Leon let out a wheezing gasp as the air was forced out of his lungs from the impact. For a moment, he struggled, grabbing at Jill's wrist to try and pull the knife free, but after only a moment, his strength began to fade, his consciousness beginning to slip as his breathing slowed and eventually could no longer keep fighting. As his grip on her hand finally released, as he went limp, Jill pulled her blade free a moment later. Watching his lifeless body drop dead at her feet, she moved in carefully, moving him over in order to kneel down, checking for a pulse but finding nothing. However, not one to leave a mission to chance, she drew her blacktail she had taken from him at the very beginning of the fight and opened fire, putting 3 rounds directly into his skull, ensuring that she had followed her orders and eliminated her target. And with that, I declare Jill Valentine, the controlled puppet, the winner. Oof, and my boy goes down yet again. Don't worry, my unnecessarily backflipping king. I'm sure Resident Evil 9 will give you something. That or you're gonna die horribly. At the time of the writing the script, I actually don't know yet. Alright, first things first, to get it out of the way, I do think Leon could win this encounter. I think it would be the hardest battle of his life, but there absolutely are scenarios that would see this going his way. For example, if the P30 device got damaged, I'm fairly certain he would be able to outfight Jill, even with the physical advantages she holds over him, or even just use her feral state to win a gunfight. After all, while it does take place far later into the timeline compared to Resident Evil 4, Death Island has shown that Leon can contend with and even defeat characters who are similarly skilled and more physically capable than he is. But just because this is something he is capable of doesn't mean it's the most likely outcome. And without the P30 device being revealed for no reason, damaged by pure chance, or him getting lucky with an environmental factor that couldn't be accounted for in a breakdown like this, chances are that while he's going to put up a respectable fight, he's not going to walk away the winner. The fact of the matter is that Jill is stronger, faster, and more durable, all on top of her physical advantages, allowing her to utilize their shared fighting styles more effectively than he would be capable of, on top of utilizing a fighting style that takes advantage of a significant weakness that he has at this point in his combative history. And to be fair, it doesn't really seem like that's something he improved on later in the timeline, seeing as how easily Jill was able to take advantage of it to land blows on him during Death Island. And while it's true that Leon's arsenal does give him an advantage, you gotta remember is that Jill is casually dodging bullets in this state. She was already capable of doing so by the events of 3, and Jill only got better as a BSAA agent and then got a significant boost with the P-30, meaning that already small edge is going to be something he's going to need to work a lot harder for in order to get the most out of. Meanwhile, the advantages Jill have just work for her naturally with the flow of combat. If we're talking Jill as she was before her controlled state, I do think it would be a lot closer, and honestly, that one would be a coin flip for the outcome. But while I am leaning towards Leon winning in that scenario, I'm not exactly confident, especially after this breakdown. So hey, maybe that's something to visit if Jill ever stars in another video game again. I mean, I know she's going to because Capcom are cowards who won't let the cast move on or die, but for now let's pretend it's a hypothetical. But that's just my opinion. What do you think? Do you agree that Jill has really no reason to lose while amped up on P-30? Or do you think that Leon would somehow be able to make up for his disadvantages and walk away the winner? Let me know in the comments down below, and if I got anything wrong, please feel free to correct me. Both of these breakdowns are a bit outdated after all, and honestly probably would be a bit different if I was doing research from scratch today instead of making this a bonus episode. But with all that, I have been Ray932, and I will see you next time.